Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is Merve Isfahani. I am the Academic Programs Manager at Columbia Global Centers, Istanbul. Today, we have two distinguished speakers, Soli Özel and Dimitrios Triantaphyllou, to talk about elections in Turkey and Greece and reflect on likely scenarios on how electoral outcomes in both countries will shape their bilateral relations and foreign policy. During the webinar, our esteemed speakers will delve into the complexities of the electoral processes in both countries and examine key issues such as regional security, energy cooperation, historical dialogue, and prospects for future cooperation between the two countries. Let me briefly introduce our speakers. Soli Özel is a senior lecturer at Kadir Has University and a fellow in residence at Columbia Global Centers, Istanbul. Özel holds a BA in economics from Bennington College and MA in international relations from Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. He was a Europe's Futures Fellow at Institute for Human Sciences in Vienna in 2021 and 2022. In the year of the pandemic, he taught a course at the American University in Central Asia and at the Menton campus of Sciences Po. The same year, he also hosted two series of webinars for Institute Montaigne on the American elections and the changing geopolitics of the Middle East. He was a Bernstein Fellow at the Shaw Center for Human Rights at Yale Law School and a visiting lecturer in the Political Science Department at Yale. He has been a columnist at Nokta Magazine and Gazete Pazar, Yeni Bin Yıl, Habertürk, and Sabah newspapers. Currently, he writes for Deutsche Welle, Turkish, Politikyo, and does a weekly commentary on world affairs for Gazete Duvar TV. He's also a contributor to the blog of Institute Montaigne. He was a Richard von Weizsäcker Fellow at the Robert Bosch Academy in Berlin between 2015 and 17, and a visiting fellow at Institute Montaigne in Paris. He is a member of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Dimitrios Triantaphyllou is a professor of international relations and the director of the Center for International and European Studies at Kadir Has University in Istanbul. He holds a BA in Political Science and History from University of California, Berkeley, and an MA and PhD degrees in International Relations from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, Tufts University. He is the author of numerous articles and book reviews and has previously served in various capacities in a number of research and academic institutions, such as the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy, the EU Institute for Security Studies, the Hellenic Observatory at the London School of Economics and the University of the Aegean Roads, and the International Center for Black Sea Studies. He also served as an advisor at the Hellenic Ministry for Foreign Affairs and as foreign policy advisor to a member of the European Parliament. He is the associate editor of Southeast European and Black Sea Studies Journal and an editor of the Eastern Journal of European Studies. He is a member of the Greek-Turkish Forum, the co-convener of the Commission on the Black Sea, a member of the advisory boards of the Black Sea Trust for Regional Cooperation, the International Institute for Peace, Vienna, the Black Sea NGO Forum, and the Corporate Social Responsibility Association, Turkey. He is also a senior associate at the Jean Monnet European Center of Excellence at the University of Athens. His more recent applied and research interests include Black Sea security and politics, EU foreign and neighborhood policies, Greek-Turkish relations, and sustainable development. And before further ado, I will leave it to you. Thank you.
Yes. Hi. Thank you very much for the introduction and for the invitation. And it's always a pleasure to share a panel with my colleague Soli Özel. So, we are talking a little bit about Greek-Turkish relations and the fact that both countries, both Greece and Turkey and Cyprus, for that matter, the Republic of Cyprus, have had elections in the first half of the year, and Greece is in the midst of a second election in a few days. And so I'd like to sort of, talk a little bit about what this actually means from a Greek perspective regarding what is happening in Greece, what is expected to be the result of the elections on the 25th of June, and then what this could actually mean for Greek-Turkish relations. Elections in Greece were originally scheduled. There was always been a discussion, when are elections in Turkey going to be scheduled? After the earthquakes, disasters of the 6th of February, lots of anticipation, expectations in Greece as to whether the electoral calendar was going to change. It did not. In Greece, there was a train disaster a couple of months later, which led to a change in the electoral calendar. Originally, elections were supposed to be held in April, but they were pushed back to the 21st of May, where everyone sort of knew who was going to win. New Democracy, the party in power with Kyriakos Mitsotakis in charge. But because of an electoral law that was applicable, an electoral law which is a party list proportional representation system, which the previous government, not the New Democracy government that had been in power since 2019, but the Syriza-led government, led by Alexis Tsipras since 2015, had passed. And because they could not pass this new electoral law with a qualified majority, it meant that these elections on the 21st of May were going to be held under this party list proportional representation system, which makes it very difficult for the first party to win outright. It would need over 45% of the vote, and therefore be forced into a coalition government. And the fact is that Greece, other than the last decade, the crisis years, the last 10 years or 15 years of crisis, since 2008 until 2019 or so, where it was forced into coalition governments, the tradition in Greece has really been usually to have a reinforced proportional electoral system, which means that whichever party comes first gets a bonus of seats, and usually it's been single-party governments. So Syriza wanted somehow to figure a way to come back to power. It failed. It failed miserably, because even though everyone knew who would win the election, no one anticipated a 20% difference between the first party, New Democracy, and Syriza. And New Democracy, that received almost 41% of the votes, actually managed to get 146 seats in parliament. I mean, parliament is 300, 151 is a majority, almost got a majority. It did not. But since already one knew during the electoral campaign that even Syriza was not willing, it had reached out to a lot of the parties on the left, PASOK and other parties that are represented in parliament, to form, if New Democracy could not on its own, to form a coalition of the smaller parties and maybe come to power, and no one wanted to work together. And I think also the fact that New Democracy won by 20% was a misreading by Syriza of what the Greek public wanted. The Greek public wanted stability, wanted hope, wanted growth, and in a way these were the most consequential elections in the last 15 years in Greece, since the economic crisis started in 2008. And I think the government was rewarded for this, because over the last 4 years, there has been a lot of growth and stability, and also a sense that the government has been able to handle national security relations issues, in particular with relevance to Turkey, relatively well. And so, even though 41% in any European democracy is a very good number, and to govern, it was not enough for New Democracy, and so Mitsotakis had said we'll go for second elections if we do not get an outright majority, and this is where we are right now. Greece is going to have its second election on the 25th of June. There's an interim government in place right now, managing the country, where the highest judge in the land has been appointed as prime minister, and then a government of basically respected professionals in their field, managers and so on, agreed upon by all political parties, or the main political parties, is actually running the country, the interim government. And so we are going towards elections where now it's almost clear again who's going to win. The thing that the big question mark is how many parties will enter parliament, because the threshold for entering parliament is 3% in Greece. And in the May 28th elections, 5 parties enter parliament. Now there might be as many as 8 smaller parties on the far right or the far left that might manage to get in. But interestingly enough, they do not seem to take away from New Democracy. They seem to be chipping away at Syriza's votes. But even then, according to the polls and the pollsters and the experts, it seems that New Democracy will get an outright majority, even with a 7 or 8 party parliament, 160, 163 deputies, which is a solid majority to be able to rule for the next 4 years. So, and that's why it's always difficult to try to explain why, when you had such a clear result in the first round, less than a month ago, why do we go to second elections? Well, because this is the way things sort of operate in the Greek context. But what does this actually mean? What does this actually mean for our discussion? Well, it means that the strong government is going to be running the country after the 25th of June. You know, the 2 or 3 days after the 25th, the prime minister will be sworn in, his cabinet will be sworn in, a strong government, a New Democracy government, a continuation of what we've had in Greece since 2019 is going to be running the country, and where the public, not necessarily voting on ideological basis. This is where I think the parties of the left have it wrong, because Greece usually, if one looks at the voters, is left-leaning usually. But here you have a center-right party, New Democracy, that has delivered on its promises. And I think this is what people have been looking at. So it's not ideology so much, but it's about growth, as I said, sustained growth, the fact that investments from abroad are starting to come, the fact that pensions are getting paid on time, the fact that for the first time in a long time, people have been seeing raises in their salaries in the public sector, pensioners and others. The minimum wage has been raised a couple of times. And every single party promise that was actually made by New Democracy in the 2019 elections has been actually met and kept. And I think all of that has contributed to why we are going to have a strong government again. And now the strong government is also a continuation in a way. We don't know who the ministers are going to be. The prime minister has said, Mitsotakis has said there's going to be a reshuffle, but we know who the prime minister is. And when it comes to foreign policy, and when it comes to relations with Turkey, and when it comes to Greece's relations with the West and the EU and the US and so on, it's pretty much set what his priorities are, and that reflect the priorities of the Greek public. And in that sense, I think the public, because national security is important, and I should also add that if one even looks at the makeup of this interim government, just because of the electoral calendar in both countries being almost simultaneous, with an eye to what's happening across in Turkey, it's very interesting that one looks at the makeup of the interim government. I mean, yes, you have a judge running the country, which is a practice when you have an interim government, but a very, very respected former ambassador running the foreign ministry. But then there are 4 ministries, Minister of National Defense, the Minister of Citizen Protection, the Minister of Shipping and Island Policy, and the Minister of Climate Change and Civil Protection, all run by a former military man, high-ranking former military men that have actually been chiefs of the army or chiefs of the Air Force. It also shows this national security priority, but also the priority regarding managers, having managers, men that know how to manage in charge. So it's not only about dealing with, if something were to happen with Turkey, but also dealing with a natural disaster or a man-made disaster, and right now it's, the Minister for Climate Change and Civil Protection, who is in charge of the Coast Guard, is actually in the Peloponnese trying to manage the refugee crisis that has evolved, the disaster with the boat that was sunk yesterday, and the death toll rising. And so it's very interesting that focus is something that Mitsotakis was very much aware of, but the political establishment, as they set up the interim government, were very much aware of the need to make sure that the country is run properly while we go through this electoral cycle. So now what we have, and this is an argument that many are suggesting in Greece, we will have in Greece a relatively strong leader, Mitsotakis. We have had the elections in Turkey. After the 28th of May, we know that President Erdogan was re-elected, and it means you have a strong government in Turkey as well. And potentially these two leaders that have crossed, their paths have crossed over time, and sometimes the relationship has been good and sometimes it has not, might be ready to maybe press that restart button. And there's always, from the Greek side, there's been some indications of this even before the first round of the elections. The former foreign minister, Nikos Zendias, in a number of interviews in the lead up to the May 21st elections, while he was still foreign minister, was basically had a change in tone and discourse on a number of issues when he came to Turkey. First of all, he says, even though there was a lot of noise in the Greek press that, some of the statements coming out of Turkey during Turkey's electoral campaign regarding Greece, then the as foreign minister would say, what we look at is a substance. And ever since the former Turkish defense minister, Hulusi Akar, in early April had said, we're going to go for a moratorium this summer, there's basically been no overflights of Greek islands, no airspace violations, and so on. So in terms of practice, this thing has been maintained. I mean, that there's a moratorium. And this allows for the possibility of a restart, and not in a restart in a way based on something that Turkey's former foreign minister, Mevlut Çavuşoğlu, had been saying, a rethink of the exploratory talks between the two countries, but maybe not exploratory talks the way they have been held 65 rounds since 2002, 2003, that were predicated upon Turkey's EU accession bid, but exploratory talks to reflect the new reality. Because what we actually need right now is a framework for trust and dialogue, right? It's not about negotiation, but it's rebuilding trust and dialogue, because high-level contacts had been reduced to almost none at all for a long while, for a few months. And I think this is what the priority of Mitsotakis is going to be. While at the same time, Mitsotakis, from a Greek perspective, because, from a Greek perspective, but also from a Turkish, I think, perspective, there's a degree of ontological insecurity when it comes, perceptions about the other side. The fact that Mitsotakis has been tested and the Greek public has rewarded him, with a fundamental tactical error on the part of Turkey, which was the incident on the Greek-Turkish border in February and March of 2020, and the fact that Greece held firm, and all of that strengthened Mitsotakis as a leader in the Greek public's eye. The crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean in the late summer, fall of 2020, and the fact that Greece has taken a position, a very clear position, regarding where it stands with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and has strengthened itself, solidified its position within the Western Bloc by even breaking a number of taboos, by taking such a clear position, by even providing some sort of military assistance, even though there's been a lot of detractors in Greece regarding this, to Ukraine, by strengthening its defense pacts with the US and France, and with other allies around the region. And of course, the fact that Mitsotakis was invited to speak to the joint houses of Congress a couple of years ago has also seemed to have strengthened his ability to project himself as the national leader in Greece, that knows, that values national security, can talk deterrence, and at the same time is willing to talk diplomacy. Because at the same time, what Mitsotakis has been saying, and I think he's one of the few leaders over the last few years that has always been talking about the need to, if the two sides cannot politically resolve their disputes, finding an agreement to go to the Court of Justice or some other sort of arbitration mechanism. So international law of the sea. Because he's not just addressing Turkey in that sense, but he's also telling the Greek public that this is potentially something that we need to do. So it's a double message that's telling the Greek public that, listen, this is an option we have to consider, and potentially we could go there for the issues that Greece considers relevant. So this is sort of where we are right now. I think potentially, and I think President Erdogan has just made statements as well from his few months ago statement about, Mitsotakis, Yok will not talk to Mitsotakis anymore. This is how it was interpreted in Greece. To his willingness maybe, or okay, sorry guys, I just found out I just became a grandfather, so I just right now. Sorry for the
Congratulations.
Thank you. And I think the fact that both leaders, Mitsotakis has been saying that once he becomes prime minister, he would like probably on the margins of the NATO summit in July in Vilnius, to meet with President Erdogan. And I think President Erdogan has also indicated that this is potentially something that's going to be happening, suggests that a restart is necessary. And we shall know more. Both sides are willing to go to a restart. And I think what we need to wait now from the Greek side is once we find out, once we have a government on the 25th of June, to see who the relevant ministers are going to be, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, in the Ministry of Defense, who the key advisors are going to be that are going to be leading this process, just like we have them on the Turkish side. It's very clear who's running the show and who has replaced whom and who the key people are, so that one can rebuild this mechanism, this trust or dialogue or communications that for a while were not quite working properly. So maybe I'll stop with this here, and then of course maybe later we can also talk about potentially things that the two sides could work on, because it's not just about building rebuilding trust and dialogue, but I think there are a number of issues, common threats and common challenges, apart from the issues directly affecting the two sides, where potentially there is a lot that the two countries could take the lead on. But I'll stop here for now.
Thank you. Dimitri, good to be with you. And first of all, congratulations. May the baby have a long and healthy and happy life. And, the father and the mother were both students of mine, so I should call them immediately as well. Okay. Well, for a long time, Turkey has occupied almost every major newspaper's front page. The elections in Turkey were deemed to be the most important of 2023, which had actually a number of pretty important elections. The Polish one is yet to come. And many pundits, myself included, considered it or labeled it as an existential election that will determine where the country would go in its second centennial, beginning or starting its second centennial. For those uninitiated, this year is Turkish Republic's centennial. On the 29th of October, the Republic is going to be 100 years old. And I guess both in Greece and Turkey, we will also hear a lot about the 100th anniversary of the Lausanne Peace Agreement, which had become a controversial matter at some point, but no longer is. And at the end of the day, despite the polls, many polls or many pollsters, the ruling coalition held its ground. It had almost a landslide in terms of seats in the parliament. And although the presidential election went to a second round, Mr. Erdogan won by and large comfortably, 52 to 48, and to continue his very long reign. He is the longest serving politician in power in the country as of today, notwithstanding the controversies about whether or not he could have run for another term. This way, I think, first of all, the direction of the Republic is going to be the direction that Mr. Erdogan sets for it. And obviously, we will see whether or not fundamental issues that the political movement ideologically he comes from, which were anti-Republican, will put more of their stamp on the trajectory of the Republic domestically. But I can say, or I think, that the presidential system, with all its imperfections, absence of checks and balances, but much more, perhaps even more important, if not, maybe more importantly, the fact that this system did not have a governance principle, that it had a serious, severe governance problem. In spite of all that, I think the presidential system has been consolidated given the fact that the opposition ran on a platform of restoring a parliamentary system, a strengthened, rectified parliamentary system, they said, the election can be interpreted as a rejection of that offer to the electorate or to the public as well. The losers, that is the opposition, is in disarray. The leading party in the opposition, the People's Republican Party, the founding party of the Republic, faces severe criticism from its supporters, from the electorate itself. The fact that the leader who ran as the candidate for the presidency and his Politburo or his lieutenants have not resigned, at least symbolically, and offered the public and the party a clean slate has rubbed the people the wrong way. And I think whether they like it or not, a competition for the leadership of the party has already begun. The trouble for the opposition, and I suspect maybe even for Turkish democracy also, is that in 10 months' time, we do have municipal elections. The only defeat that perhaps the most severe defeat that Mr. Erdogan has ever had to face was in 2019, when his party lost the metropolitan municipality, the mayor's race in Istanbul. Mr. Erdogan has begun his unstoppable ascent when he got elected the mayor of Istanbul in 1994. He is on record for having said that if you win Istanbul, you win Turkey. Therefore, if you lose Istanbul, you may actually lose Turkey. And Istanbul is very important. And he, in fact, in his victory speech, the night of the second round of the presidential elections, immediately launched the campaign for the municipal election and for the retaking or for taking back of Istanbul. And of course, the mayor of Istanbul, who is from the CHP, is under legal perils, let's say. His appeal, which was supposed to be decided, was postponed. The decision was postponed till the 30th of November. There is another case against him that was brought to courts on corruption when he was the mayor of a small Istanbul municipality. And so the judiciary will be hanging over his head like a Damocles sword. He is probably the most popular politician that the CHP has. He wishes to become the president, the chairman of the party, but of course he cannot simultaneously be the chairman of the party and the mayor of Istanbul. Therefore, he would have to find formula if he wants to run, maybe to find a substitute that would be willing to give him that position once his term as mayor is over. So it's going to be very complicated, and quite frankly, not the major opposition party, not all the other smaller parties, quite frankly, look up to par with in the aftermath of their defeat. Now, still, Mr. Erdogan formed a cabinet which most pundits found to be a conciliatory and a more competent cabinet, both domestically and internationally. And of course, for the rest of the world, the choice of his foreign minister was of utmost importance. And the foreign minister is his longtime associate, someone whom he said he trusts a lot, the former intelligence chief of Turkey, Hakan Fidan, who served in that position for 13 years. Fidan has become the foreign minister, and Mr. Erdogan's second closest associate, Ibrahim Kalın, has been appointed as head of intelligence. What this tells us is that of the foreign policy and security team of Erdogan's last term, that included Fidan, Kalın, the defense minister Akar, and the foreign minister Çavuşoğlu. Two of them are in place. Mr. Erdogan is obviously in place. He will frame what foreign policy Turkey is going to pursue. Akar and Çavuşoğlu are now in parliament. They will be heading commissions, or Akar will head a commission, not Çavuşoğlu, but they're out of the picture. And Mr. Erdogan is going to be running the foreign policy of the country with two very trusted lieutenants. And Fidan's first words when he assumed the position was to exonerate, to honor the diplomats who worked in the foreign ministry, which whom his predecessor did not particularly care about, alienated, and actually did not pay much attention to or much respect to. The other most important, maybe even more important than the foreign policy appointments, of course, was the appointment of the economy minister, former economy minister Mehmet Şimşek, who has been literally kicked out of his position before, was brought back after a lot of insistence, and presumably he has the leeway to actually re-rationalize Turkish economic policy management. The jury is out. We'll see what his team is going to do. The old central bank governor is going to be yet in another important position. So the signals are mixed, and Mr. Erdogan, on his way back from Azerbaijan, answering the questions of the journalists, basically gave not a full-throated support, but support to Mehmet Şimşek's management, and he even conceded that he might accept an interest rate hike if that is what Şimşek deems necessary. For how long, that remains a big question. For me, in that question and answer session on the plane on the way back from Cyprus and Azerbaijan, the tone of his messages was actually pretty important. First of all, on Cyprus, and of course, to me, Cyprus is the biggest thorn in Turkish-Greek relations. And partially because the Greek governments cannot really do anything that the Greek Cypriots do not like. On Cyprus, Mr. Erdogan said, when he was visiting his counterpart there, that there would be no negotiations until and unless the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus is recognized as an independent entity. Whether or not that will be possible, whether or not either the Greek Cypriots or the relevant international institutions and states will accept such a precondition remains to be seen. But given the fact that in the last two important steps, when a settlement perhaps was within reach, it was the Greek Cypriots that have rejected it, that may be something that needs to be pondered. Another important message that he gave was on Armenia, and that is, quite frankly, a bit puzzling to me, that the Europeans, particularly one such as France, which has always been very concerned with Armenia matters, Armenian, and he was part of the Minsk group, that they don't pay much attention, it seems, to the growing relations between the thaw in in Turkish-Armenian relations. Just to remind you, when Turkey was hit by an earthquake, both the Republic of Armenia and the Republic of Cyprus wanted to send 8 teams. The Greek Cypriot demand or application was rejected, but the Armenians were able to send their 8 teams. Afterwards, Armenia's foreign minister, and by the way, Turkey and Armenia do not have diplomatic relations, visited Turkey along with the Greek foreign minister at the time. President Pashinyan was at the inauguration of Mr. Erdogan last week. And all indications are such that Mr. Pashinyan prevails in his country to try to move it away from Russia and probably towards the West. Turkey is a member of NATO. Turkey and Israel did help Azerbaijan to win 2 years ago the war against Armenia, and therefore the Karabakh issue is by and large militarily settled. All we need is a diplomatic solution, although there are tensions between the two sides. And I'm really puzzled that there is no interest on the part of the European Union or the interested members of the European Union in trying to get together with Turkey and to see whether this momentum could be brought in a rush, in a way, to a conclusion, and thereby South Caucasus would be much less Russified and certainly much more inclined to work with the West. And of course, the Republic of Armenia will benefit immensely if the diplomatic relations are restored and the border between Turkey and Armenia were to be opened. And in his conversation with the journalist, Erdogan appeared to be very open to such what would have been considered drastic developments before. Finally, on, 2 more things on Greece. Yes, as Dimitri reminded us, after having said that Mitsotakis did not exist for him, Mr. Erdogan said that there was no reason for the two sides to not to speak, and that maybe in Vilnius they would be meeting and having a conversation. And he actually called on the Greek Prime Minister and said, "Why are you buying all these weapons? You're not producing them. Let's talk peace rather than rearmament." Whether or not this will lead anywhere, I don't know, but I kind of share Dimitri's optimism that relations can actually move in a much better and much more constructive direction, notwithstanding what I consider to be, at least for the moment, the impossibility of moving forward on Cyprus. Turkey will continue, I think, its active balancing act in the Ukraine-Russia war. Given the fact that I understand most of the merchandise that goes to Russia are being transported by Greek ships, which may or may not be in violation of the sanctions, what Turkey does just doesn't strike me as totally out of line in terms of its location. Moreover, it allows it to contribute to the grain deal, although Putin says that he's not very happy with it. Prisoner exchange and all sorts of other things that Turkey can do because it can speak openly with both sides, with both belligerents, if you will. Finally, on Turkish foreign policy, the guiding principle of Turkish foreign policy, and this is now being accentuated further and further, is strategic autonomy. The quest for strategic autonomy will continue. And therefore, some NATO allies will find Turkey not being very faithful to the allies or to the institution. And of course, the most important sign of that is Turkey's vetoing of Swedish accession. Quite frankly, although the president said that in Vilnius he would not be willing to give the green light to the Swedish accession, I think until Vilnius, things may change, and we may actually end up seeing the Turkish parliament approving the accession of Sweden, and therefore a point of tension between Turkey and NATO and the United States, of course, would be lifted. And in return, I guess the United States will have to deliver the F-16s that the administration has already asked the Senate to approve.
Thank you very much. Maybe we take from here because, Dimitrios, you also mentioned in the end of your part that, maybe we can reflect more on, common threats and challenges. So one question from our audience is, once the Greek elections are finalized, are you seeing a chance for more polarization in Greek-Turkish relations? And can you give examples of specific areas where this could occur? So maybe we can take from there.
Polarization, yes. I mean, right now, I think there's potential for a conversation and working on a few areas. And I'll get to this in a second. Polarization, the concern is, I think in Greece and among the community of analysts and maybe policymakers that deal in foreign relations, it has to do again with the continued electoral cycle in Turkey. And I think Soli has talked about this, the dilemmas for Turkey and its new government and the links between, what needs to be done in the economy and the impact this might also actually have on the government's policies, of subsidies and whatever it does in order to be able to regain the metropolitan municipalities of Istanbul and Ankara and a few others. And so in that sense, if there's no progress on the NATO front, that means there's no progress with the US regarding the F-16s. If the interest rate hike that's expected to come next week, whenever it is expected to come, might be prove that it has negative consequences for the government and the economy and so on. And as we move towards these municipal elections, the fear is that the concern, more than fear, that foreign policy might come back big in an expression of this strategic autonomy, in an expression of the century of Turkey, right? And this whole policy thing. And therefore, one might see more polarization on a number of fronts. It could happen between Greece and Turkey. And I think there's some concern for this. But on the other hand, notwithstanding that, there's a window of opportunity. And I think it's about using the window of opportunity, the two leaders indicating a willingness to talk. We'll figure out whether it's going to be possible under what conditions. And I think more than talk, and this is the time for us as analysts in particular to come up with ideas as well, is what could be, other than setting up a framework for dialogue, what issues could the two sides move forward with? Some of it have to do, here we're moving to the summer. What happens in the summer, unfortunately is, the climate crisis is real. Forest fires are going to start occurring in both our countries and in other countries across the region. Fires that no country can handle the magnitude on its own. It needs help. And how do you deal with these challenges of the climate crisis? Even though there was already some work being done in the past in terms of environmental protection, tourism, which is a concern and a shared interest of both. Can you set up maybe dealing with these issues, a joint task force on emergencies or disaster management, or working group, study groups on energy and in particular renewables, but also energy in the sense that there is a framework. I mean, even before the elections, and that stopped for a while, there was an attempt to get a positive agenda between the two countries, also complementary to the positive agenda that the EU has expressed it wants to have with Turkey. And so could one deal on this positive agenda, especially when it comes to energy, or not only that, maybe finding a way to energize the business sectors of both sides to work together in joint projects, energy, construction. For example, we've had the earthquakes and reconstruction happening in Turkey. Is there something that Greek companies could contribute to, working together with Turkish companies? And is there a way maybe to reconsider, and this is an idea that's been discussed by many, the business council model, which might not be working, the Greek-Turkish Business Council, Turkish-Greek Business Council, and so on, to something else where maybe on both governments somewhere, whether it's under the Greek Prime Minister, the Turkish President, or the ministries of foreign affairs have some sort of coordinator, a national coordinator, for example, that whose job is there to pinpoint to the private sector in their respective countries that, listen, these are potential areas where you can work together as companies, you know, to sort of identify areas of doing this. Then, you know, we just had the big disaster of the Greek coast with the boat, the refugees. I mean, illegal immigration flows have to be discussed more systematically. And if we remember, as part of that positive agenda before the elections, I mean, it happened last year, there was a high-level meeting between the Minister for Migration, for Asylum and Migration of Greece, together with his Turkish counterpart, who was the Minister of the Interior. So Soli Özel met in Ankara, Notis Mitarakis, with a huge delegation to talk about this issue. And also the Minister of Tourism met, I think, in the Bodrum or Antalya, I can't remember, but with huge delegations. Or there might be ways of trying to see where we can work, because these are joint challenges. Health crisis and epidemics also is something that it's a less, you know, something one can work on with, and even hybrid threats, maybe within the NATO context, because some of the threats are common. And other than this, you know, Soli and I are academics. You know, how do you enhance, you know, academic cooperation? How do you create real epistemic communities? Not, you know, I mean, even this in a coordinated manner. It's not a question of, oh yes, you know, a Turkish university working for an EU project in a consortium, and there happens to be a Greek university together with other universities. But how can the two countries maybe also through coordinators guide Greek and Turkish academia, not just in the social sciences, the natural sciences, engineers, and so on, to work together more systematically and help both countries lobby for the scientific communities of both countries to get a lot of these bids, the funding in Brussels, where they can promote some of these potentially cooperative frameworks. And the last idea, I mean, these are just some ideas that are being discussed, and maybe, and I'm working with a Turkish colleague to try to give some flesh to them, is also potentially, if one looks, I think was the October 2020 European Council conclusions that talked about a multilateral conference in the Eastern Mediterranean, the need for that, something that President Erdogan has said in the past, and Charles Michel also says it's his idea, and this was part of the conclusions, and it's always there in the European councils whenever there's a paragraph about Turkey. Maybe this is where Athens and Ankara, I think, can take the lead. And I have a model in mind, and with another colleague from Kadir Has, with Mustafa Aydin, we are working on this, a BSEC for the Eastern Mediterranean, the Black Sea Economic Cooperation model, which was set up, you know, it was the leaders in this were Ankara and Moscow in particular, after the end of the Cold War, where you try to bring together the regional states to work on a number of low politics issues. And there are like 17 working groups, from tourism to energy cooperation to cultural exchanges to a number of these. Why can't Athens and Ankara take the lead and create a multilateral framework to say, this is something we initiate, and we're trying to deal with a lot of these issues that I talked about together, because there are common challenges there, and bring in other regional states. Yes, someone is going to tell me, yeah, but how do you bring in Cyprus? Turkey doesn't know. I think diplomats can find a way of dealing with these things. So maybe there's potential for this, albeit the tensions, albeit the fact that deterrence is still important, albeit the fact that Turkey, yes, is on the path of strategic autonomy, and from the Greek perspective, one has to, you know, one is totally aware that Greece, you know, just had its census, and it's a country, it's a population that's decreasing, negative demographics, and Turkey is a country potentially of 100 million in a couple of decades, and Turkey at some stage, albeit its economic problems, will be a top 10 economy of the world, right? So there is a gap in terms of size and potential of each country, but nevertheless, I think, and this is why Greece values a lot its EU membership and membership in NATO and so on, potentially the two countries also could act together as co-leaders in a number of issues of relevance to their wider neighborhood.
Thank you very much. All very important points. Soli Bey.
There are questions here, and I'll be telegraphically trying to answer them. Şihat Çubukçuoğlu's question. I think we will not see the very tense days of September 2020 again, 2020 again. And it's true, since then, Turkey has actually ameliorated its relations with Israel, not as much with Greece, with Egypt. And quite frankly, I think the Cyprus gas reserves are not something that is so very important, and the gas is going to Europe via Egypt, and it's liquefied gas. And so if Turkey's relations with Egypt and Israel get much better, I think another East Med forum can be formed, and Turkey would then be a member. And I think it is really silly not to have Turkey included in there, so long as our voices are calm, and then there is a willingness for dialogue. I think that can be overcome, and we will not revisit September 2020. On the Syrian crisis, I mean, already Dimitris had already touched upon this. I will not say much on that. Look, Turkey and Greece have a different list of what is important for them bilaterally on the Aegean. I still think Cyprus is the poison well, but on the Aegean, I think all the issues are well known. We just do not have the political will on either side to sit down and then settle them. What will it take to actually have that political will in place? Quite frankly, I don't know. I think we've come close a couple of times. You know, the exploratory talks have been going on for nearly 2 decades now. So for Turkey, it's the militarization of the islands. Then there is the territorial waters issue, the airspace issue, and all that. I honestly don't think any of those issues are unsettleable, unlike the Cyprus one, which has to do with recognition of political equality and stuff. If there is a political will, I think we can attain that. And the thing is, look, we do have a very calm atmosphere now. Nice words from both sides. 6 months from now, the mood and the atmosphere may change again. So we need to have a much more stable, peaceful atmosphere guiding the two sides' relations. And that may also be related to Turkey's relations, both with NATO in general and with the United States. But I do agree with Dimitri that there are lots of areas of cooperation for the two sides. And this is not just because I'm a peacenik and stuff. That I think is the reality.
We only have thank you very much. We only have a few minutes left, but we have one more question.
For Dimitri, yes.
With the poll companies, because you all both touched upon that. So we're we're kind of being used to that, poll companies, the pollsters are being wrong in the elections in Turkey, but it is the first time that such a big miscalculation has occurred in Greece. What could be the reason? I think this is for you, Dimitri, and Soli, please.
Thank you. I'll get to this, but one of the things regarding Cyprus, which is interesting, if one follows the debate in the Republic of Cyprus, there's concern there that because of the potential of goodwill between Greece and Turkey, that Ankara and Athens might decide how to move forward on Cyprus. So Nicosia is now, but we'll see. I mean, whatever it is, Cyprus poisons the relations, but there is concern that Athens might change its methodology, which has always been Nicosia decides and Athens follows, to maybe changing that, but we shall see. Now, regarding the polls, I mean, it's interesting. There are two things that are at play, because we also live in a world of fake news and so on. There were polls in Western media, and in particular, for example, a site, Euractiv, which everyone reads when anyone interested in Brussels, even suggesting that there was a secret poll among companies that actually Syriza was going to win. This is all fake news. Everyone knew who was going to win. The polling companies have come out now saying that they had identified the 20-point difference, but they were afraid of saying it in public. They were actually being bullied a bit also by Syriza. They were concerned that this might lead to some sort of uproar, that you are trying to manipulate the results. And it's so interesting. And I think I buy that argument, because ever since the elections, you've had now the major polling companies coming out almost every day with polls, talking about the next election. And they're talking about 21, 22% now. And it's like, it's not an issue anymore. So I think there was a lot of pressure from the opposition and concern of the polling, how this would reflect on them, even though they were correct in their assessments. And it seems that even the pollsters for Syriza were aware of this. But it never came out in public. So in that sense, I, as a voter who was not aware of what was happening, yes, I was surprised, even though I had my expectations that the difference could be as much as 10 points, not 20 points. But it seems now, as mouth is starting to open, they were not really off. I think this explains the Greek setting, because I think it's a shocking result. It's a shocking result either way. And even though then you start talking to people as to why they voted. So it means a lot of people vote for New Democracy. And I know people that, had never voted for them before. They did because they saw that something was happening in the country. As I said, pensioners, they got their pensions. Others felt there's potential for growth. There's some stability. And these are not ideological reasons. So it explains why the difference was so big. But I think polling companies do not know how to tell the truth. And as I said, the same polling companies right now, all of them are coming up with this 19 to 21, 22% difference. And no one, even in the opposition, is doubting this anymore, because it's obvious that this is the reality right now in Greek politics. I don't know if this explains it, but at least it explains, I think, the Greek context.
Thank you very much. On this note, we are just the end of our time, but we would like to thank you both, and Dimitri also, thank you very much for being with us on this very special day. We're actually very happy to be part of this very important moment for you. And
I announced it as soon as I found out, right? My son texted me and I told you, so I just found out. Can't wait to talk to him now. Yes.
Congratulations to you and your family. And Soli Bey, Dimitri, and our audience, thank you very much for being with us.